The crossing of the Rhine River in March of 1945 marked the defining moment in the final push against German forces. The Rhine presented a formidable natural defense for Germany, often referred to as the enemy's last major barrier. While the courage and determination of combat troops typically garner the most historical attention, the successful assaults across this wide, swiftly flowing water obstacle relied absolutely on the heroic, yet often unrecognized efforts of specialized maritime personnel. These crucial crossings, including the famous Battle of Remagen, would simply not have been possible without the unheralded boatmen drawn from the United States Navy and the United States Coast Guard. These were the men who navigated the strong currents, ferrying thousands of soldiers, vehicles, and tons of vital equipment into the heart of the German homeland. Their story is often reduced to a minor footnote in the history of the Second World War, but their invaluable contribution guaranteed the rapid success of the United States Army's operations. For instance, Lieutenant General George S. Patton Jr.'s United States Third Army executed a bold and sudden crossing of the Rhine near Oppenheim at the village of Nierstein on March 22, 1945. This hasty assault, typical of Patton's style, proceeded without any formal planning and astonishingly without preparatory artillery or airstrikes. It was a move made on the run by the rapidly advancing divisions of Major General Manton S. Eddy's 12th Corps. The swiftness of this exploitation of crumbling German defenses was made possible through the great assistance provided by the professionals of the United States Navy and the United States Coast Guard. The ability of the Allied forces to overcome this vast, natural obstacle was rooted in recognizing the unique challenges presented by the Rhine. The river was known for its great width and its swiftly flowing current, which posed a major obstacle to any crossing efforts. This understanding led to a necessary collaboration between the ground forces and the sea service. It must be understood that the utilization of the United States Navy in this inland river crossing was precipitated by a critical event months earlier. Had the British forces succeeded in crossing the Rhine in early September 1944 at Arnhem in the Netherlands, the United States Navy might never have been called upon to assist with the later Rhine River efforts. The failure to defeat the German forces defending the bridge over the river at Arnhem directly helped necessitate the subsequent employment of the specialized landing craft by the British and the American 1st, 3rd, and 9th United States Armies in March 1945. Recognizing the inevitability of the destruction of all existing Rhine bridges and acknowledging the difficulty posed by the river itself, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley's engineers sought assistance. In early October 1944, they approached Admiral Harold Stark, the commander of United States Navy forces in Europe, to inquire about the possibility of naval support. The immediate result of these discussions was the decision to deploy specialized naval craft. The vessels chosen were the Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, often known by its abbreviation Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, and the Landing Craft Mechanized, frequently referred to as the Landing Craft Mechanized. These craft were selected specifically because of their demonstrated ability to operate effectively even in the Rhine's highly challenging 8-knot current. Planning conferences to coordinate the complex operation began that very same month, October 1944. The stalemate that settled across the northwestern European battlefront in the early autumn of 1944, following the failure of Operation Market Garden, provided a crucial window of opportunity. With little immediate prospect of a successful drive to cross the Rhine, the United States Navy was able to step in and join the Army engineers. Together, they began intensive training for the deliberate river crossings, combining both Army and Navy assets. By November 1944, the Army and Navy planners had successfully outlined a general approach for the Rhine crossings. The naval involvement revolved around a specific class of highly durable and versatile landing craft, creations of the legendary builder Andrew Action Higgins. Higgins had conceived and constructed the famous Higgins boat landing craft, which was officially designated as the Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel. Along with its larger sibling, the Landing Craft Mechanized, these boats were manufactured by the thousands and saw service globally throughout the Second World War. The Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel had a longer history, having evolved from the initial Landing Craft Personnel, which was called the Landing Craft Personnel. The initial Landing Craft Personnel was a flat-bottomed vessel measuring 36 feet in length and notably constructed of plywood. It featured a spoon-shaped bow, which allowed it to successfully swim up onto a gradually sloping beach. This characteristic, the combination of shallow draft, flat bottom, and maneuverability, was essential for the later evolution into the landing craft vehicle personnel. The updated landing craft vehicle personnel could carry 36 men and required a crew of 3. Its dimensions, 36 feet long and 10 feet wide, also made it possible for the craft to transport vehicles. With the addition of a bow ramp, vehicles could drive directly off the vessel. Specifically, the landing craft vehicle personnel was capable of carrying either a 2.5-ton truck or 2-quarter-ton jeeps. For heavier lifting, the naval forces utilized the landing craft mechanized. This larger vessel was popularly known as a Mike boat. The landing craft mechanized was an all-metal vessel that displaced 30 tons. It was designed and developed to carry a single armored fighting vehicle such as a Sherman tank. It was sometimes referred to as a tank lighter. Equipped with twin diesel engines, the landing craft mechanized was quite maneuverable, requiring a very skilled coxswain to operate it effectively. Furthermore, the craft possessed an impressive 130-mile range, meaning it had the capability to sail across the English Channel entirely on its own. Both the landing craft mechanized and the landing craft vehicle personnel were active participants in the Rhine River crossings. These boats were navigated or driven by experienced sailors of the United States Navy and the United States Coast Guard. Many of these crews had already gained crucial combat experience operating such craft during the massive June 1944 invasion of Normandy. The personnel assigned to this vital mission were organized under the Navy's Task Force 122.5. This force was initially composed of 5 subordinate task units equipped entirely with the smaller landing craft vehicle personnel. However, it quickly became apparent that craft capable of carrying heavy armored fighting vehicles would be absolutely required for the Rhine crossing. Consequently, the larger landing craft mechanized vessels were swiftly added to the existing task units.
Each task unit was fully equipped with boat crews and a dedicated maintenance detachment to ensure continuous operations. 3 of these units were immediately assigned to support the 3 key United States armies participating in the crossing: the 1st, 3rd, and 9th United States Armies. These units were designated as Task Unit 122.5.1, Task Unit 122.5.2, and Task Unit 122.5.3, respectively. The commanding officers for these essential task units were all officers of the United States Naval Reserve. Lieutenant Wilton Wenker commanded Task Unit 122.5.1. Lieutenant Commander William Lade commanded Task Unit 122.5.2. Lieutenant Commander Willard T. Patrick commanded Task Unit 122.5.3. A 4th task unit, designated Task Unit 122.5.4, was organized under Reserve Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Riley. This unit was strategically stationed at the French port of Lieur. Its purpose there was to serve as a crucial backup force to the 3 task units deployed forward near the front lines. The 5th original task unit was assembled in the British Isles, but ultimately did not deploy to the European continent for the river crossings. The broader operational grouping, Task Group 122.5, to which all the boats were assigned, was commanded by United States Navy Commander William J. Whiteside. However, due to the highly decentralized nature of the various river crossing operations happening across a wide front, Commander Whiteside exercised only limited command and control over the specific task units once they were attached to their respective Army commands. Each of the primary task units was substantially manned. Each unit included 13 officers, most of whom held very junior grades, and 205 enlisted men, drawn from either the United States Navy or the United States Coast Guard. These 205 men operated 24 boats, as the vessels were commonly known within the Navy. The preparations for the assault across the Rhine were complex and began many months before the first successful crossing occurred at the German town of Remagen on March 7, 1945. In the rear areas, certain engineer units took on the task of intensive training and experimentation. Their work involved not only familiarizing themselves with their own equipment, but also learning the effective employment of the Navy boats. For the Navy personnel, the training process started with the logistical challenge of moving the vessels themselves. The landing craft vehicle personnel were first shipped on British vessels to the French port of Lieur. The boats belonging to Task Unit 122.5.4 remained there, functioning as the command reserve. The landing craft vehicle personnel designated to support the 3 forward deployed United States armies were then loaded onto trucks equipped with trailers. These transports were dispatched to carefully selected engineer locations situated on various rivers within Belgium and France, where the required pre-crossing training could be conducted effectively. The initial landing craft vehicle personnel unit to arrive on the European continent was Lieutenant Wenker's Task Unit 122.5.1. This unit arrived in Belgium on October 18th. It was immediately attached to the 120th Combat Engineer Group, which was part of the 1st Army's 7th Corps. Within just 1 week of its arrival, 6 of the boats were moved from the group's location at Andenne on the Meuse River in Belgium. They were transported to a new training site shared with the 298th Engineer Combat Battalion at the village of Cherat. This particular site was chosen because its river conditions were deemed similar to those expected on the Rhine River. A week after that, yet another training site was opened at Liège, working alongside the 297th Engineer Combat Battalion. The sheer act of moving the oversized boats to the various rear training areas proved to be a significant training exercise in itself. Routes had to be carefully chosen to accommodate the massive loaded vehicles. In some cases, buildings in rubble-filled towns and villages had to be systematically demolished just to allow the passage of the extremely large transport vehicles. When the larger landing craft mechanized vessels finally sailed across the English Channel in January 1945, their transportation overland presented even greater challenges. These landing craft mechanized boats were loaded onto specialized tank retriever trailers. The complete combination, the tractor, trailer, and boat, measured 77 feet long and weighed 70 tons. Through extremely careful handling, however, these massive boats successfully reached their destinations. The valuable lessons learned during the complex process of transporting these large vessels over land were later put to effective use when the boats were urgently required to be taken to launching sites directly on the Rhine on very short notice. Training for Wenker's Task Unit 122.5.1 resumed at Andenne after crucial experimentation regarding different methods of launching the landing craft vehicle personnel was successfully completed at Cherat. Since the Army engineers were scheduled to control the eventual boat operations, the training regimen included a half-week spent working directly with Army engineers. During this time, the boat crews assisted the engineers in building various prototypes of bridges, models for those that they anticipated constructing over the Rhine. The remaining week was dedicated to conducting specific Navy training and performing necessary maintenance on the boats. The training schedule was intensive, though it was intermittent. The constant shifting of the 1st Army's strategic plans caused disruptions. First, there were plans for a possible crossing of the Rhine River, which was subsequently canceled. Then the German Ardennes offensive, famously known as the Battle of the Bulge, launched in December, necessitated a temporary halt and redeployment. The German advance came within only 11 miles of the location at Andenne. To prevent the boats and their valuable crews from being captured or destroyed, it became necessary to move them farther back into Belgium, to the town of Wareham. The experiences of Lieutenant Commander Lade's Task Unit 122.5.2 clearly demonstrate the comprehensive and complex nature of the preparation activities conducted by these specialized boat units. This unit was assigned to the United States Army's 1134th Combat Engineer Group. Their training site was located in the vicinity of Toul, France, directly on the Moselle River. The location was ideal for both training and experimentation. The personnel were billeted in a former cavalry barracks that had previously been occupied by the German Army. This location was close to the river, enabling efficient practice of launching and retrieving the boats.
On November 15, 1944, the boat unit arrived at Toul. They immediately began preparing for an anticipated crossing of the Rhine River that had been originally scheduled for December. The boat crews commenced intensive training sessions that were conducted both day and night. The weather conditions were notoriously disagreeable, characterized by cold temperatures, continuous rain, sleet, and persistent mist. While the Moselle River at the time of their training had recently been at flood stage, causing some minor issues, it ultimately did not provide a true challenge. Its normal width was insufficient to adequately match the vast expanse of water that the crews would eventually encounter on the Rhine. In addition to the highly repetitive training designed to build muscle memory and efficiency, the boat unit carried out numerous and diverse experiments concerning loading procedures and transit techniques. Unit members attempted different methods for loading and securely fastening every single type of weapon system that could physically fit into the hull of a landing craft vehicle personnel. Special attention was paid to the capability for medical evacuation.
A specialized kit was developed specifically to allow for the litter transport of 14 prone casualties. Furthermore, various techniques were tested for carrying different types of small-wheeled vehicles. Through this careful experimentation, it was determined, for example, that a 9.5-ton bulldozer could only barely fit into the hull of a landing craft vehicle personnel. All of this highly detailed work was initially conducted exclusively with the landing craft vehicle personnel, as the larger landing craft mechanized vessels were not yet available for the anticipated December crossing date. On November 10th, Lieutenant Commander Lyde and his key personnel attended a detailed river assault briefing held at the United States Third Army headquarters in Nancy, France. At that moment, the Army had just initiated a crossing of the Saar River in Germany. The strategic plan was to penetrate the German West Wall and rapidly advance toward the Rhine River. Hopes for an immediate crossing were high among the commanders. However, these hopes proved to be premature. On December 16th, the German army suddenly launched its massive counteroffensive in the Ardennes. The boat training immediately shifted focus. Crews were forced to practice the demolition of their valuable vessels, specifically using thermite grenades in case the German offensive reached their locations. The boats commanded by Lieutenant Wenker at Andenne on the Meuse River in Belgium were the most directly threatened by this turn of events. They lay squarely in the path of the powerful German thrust intended to reach Antwerp. While the units commanded by Lieutenant Commander Lyde and Lieutenant Commander Patrick were located outside the intended path of the primary German advance, they were not considered to be as immediately endangered. Nevertheless, destruction preparations were conscientiously made for those units as well, just in case the front line shifted. As the intense German attack began to falter and lose momentum, crucial reinforcements arrived. 45 landing craft mechanized vessels reached the continent. Their arrival was essential for transporting the heavier equipment and larger vehicles that would be necessary to cross the wide Rhine River. With these landing craft mechanized vessels came additional personnel. Specifically for the Third Army, this influx included a detachment of Seabees, who were specialized members of a naval construction battalion. Their specific mission was to instruct the Army engineers in the proper assembly of light-range pontoons. As a result of these reinforcements, Lieutenant Commander Lyde's boat unit expanded significantly, growing to include 250 enlisted men and 18 officers. The other forward deployed boat units received similar substantial increases in their operational strength. With the successful reduction of the German salient, often called the Bulge, and the subsequent retreat of the German army back into Germany, the time for the long-planned Rhine River assault crossing rapidly approached. On March 7th, elements belonging to the United States Army's 9th Armored Division achieved a stunning success. They seized the Ludendorff Railroad Bridge over the Rhine at Remagen fully intact. This achievement was a revelation, as the German forces had systematically blown up all other bridges behind them during their retreat further to the east. Lieutenant Wenker's task unit, operating within the 1st Army sector, was the very first naval unit to see action in the crucial crossing operations. The intensive training in boat operations and the difficult overland movement procedures immediately proved their immense value. Late on the night of March 7th, Lieutenant Wenker received a hurried and urgent call. He was informed that the United States 9th Armored Division had captured the bridge at Remagen. Wenker was immediately ordered to move his boats to the crossing site with the maximum possible speed. The historic Battle of Remagen had instantly and unexpectedly begun. Lieutenant Wenker swiftly loaded his landing craft vehicle personnel and landing craft mechanized vessels onto their massive tractor-trailer combinations. He then began moving his Boat Unit 1 over roads that were notoriously narrow and severely congested. His behemoths, the oversized transports, had to compete for precious road space with thousands of troop units, massive armor formations, and endless streams of supplies. Official reports filed at the time vividly described the entire trip as being a nightmarish ordeal. Despite the immense logistical difficulties, Lieutenant Wenker's skilled sailors and Coast Guardsmen successfully launched the first 10 of their boats into the Rhine on March 11th. The launching site was at the riverside town of Bad Neuenahr. The unit was now operating under the centralized control of the 1st Army's 3rd Corps. These initial boats were immediately assigned the critical mission of assisting the 552nd Engineer Combat Battalion. Their objective was the construction of a heavy pontoon bridge across the Rhine at Kuip. The intensive preparatory training that the men had endured now began to pay off in real-time combat situations.
During the first critical week of the Battle of Remagen, before the captured Ludendorff Bridge eventually weakened and collapsed, the naval boats worked continuously and relentlessly. Often operating directly under enemy fire,
Their primary mission was to aid in the construction of 6 additional bridges and actively protect them from potentially lethal German suicide swimmers. They performed what was referred to as yeoman's work in supporting the efforts of the Army engineers. Their ability to operate reliably in the swift Rhine River current was essential, as this challenging current severely tested the capabilities of the standard Army water equipment. By March 15th, all 24 of the Task Unit 122.5.1's landing craft vehicle personnel were fully engaged in action. They were operating along an active 35-mile front. When the compromised railroad bridge at Remagen finally and inevitably collapsed, the unit immediately shifted focus. They turned to the high-priority task of transporting the troops belonging to the 1st, 2nd, and 69th Infantry Divisions across the formidable river. Simultaneously, they were responsible for bringing back several hundred wounded soldiers from the far bank. By March 27th, the naval units had successfully ferried an impressive total of 14,000 troops and 400 vehicles to the eastern side of the Rhine. Meanwhile, Lieutenant General Patton's United States Third Army had rapidly raced to the Rhine River, reaching multiple points along its bank. The Third Army began its spectacular crossing operations early on March 22nd. In total, Third Army units conducted 4 separate assaults across the river at 4 different points. The very first assault on March 22nd occurred at Nierstein, located only a short distance from Oppenheim. It was executed by the 5th Infantry Division and was immediately followed by the 90th Infantry Division. The second major assault crossing was made farther down the river at the town of Bompert by the 87th Infantry Division on the morning of March 24. This was followed the very next night by a crossing at St. Goar, located a few miles upriver from Bompert. The final crossing operation in this sector was executed from the city of Mainz, situated at the confluence of the Rhine and Main rivers, on March 28 by the 80th Infantry Division. Crucially, all of these separate landings were thoroughly supported by Lieutenant Commander Lade's task unit, which utilized both the landing craft vehicle personnel and the larger landing craft mechanized vessels. Despite the successful training conducted with the Army's 1134th Combat Engineer Group, Lieutenant Commander Lade encountered significant challenges during the actual crossing missions. He found that the Army units stationed at the various launch sites were often vague regarding the necessary coordination. They seemed unsure as to precisely how and when to effectively employ the naval boats during the execution of the assault missions. Lieutenant Commander Lade was compelled to assert himself multiple times simply to persuade the Army units to even consider utilizing the dedicated naval elements. However, the value of the boats quickly became undeniable. The statistics gathered during the operation clearly revealed their essential worth. This performance later resulted in an emphatic letter of commendation personally issued by General Patton after the entire series of crossings was complete. The operation at Oppenheim was characterized by extreme speed. Once General Patton made the resolute decision to beat his rival, the British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, across the Rhine, events moved with astonishing rapidity. On March 21st, Lieutenant Commander Lade and his executive officer were en route to coordinate the crossing operations at the town of Warstadt, situated approximately 20 miles from Oppenheim. While traveling, Army headquarters informed them that the jump-off time for the crossing was already slated for 10 o'clock that very evening. This sudden acceleration created serious logistical problems. Lieutenant Commander Lade had not even had the opportunity to conduct a reconnaissance of potential launching sites. This severely complicated the decision of where precisely along the river to bring the boats for the crucial entry into the water. As events unfolded, the landing craft vehicle personnel, which had left Toul earlier, arrived on their massive tractor trailers at 9:30 in the evening. Upon arrival, the crews found that the 11th Infantry Regiment was scheduled to make the initial assault using standard Army engineer craft. The naval personnel discovered that the combat troops were initially unsure about the proper use of the specialized landing craft vehicle personnel. The troops could not immediately decide how many boats they needed Lieutenant Commander Lade to deploy for the operation. Taking decisive action on his own initiative, Lieutenant Commander Lade chose to unload his boats and utilize tornado cranes borrowed from the Army vehicles and proceeded to launch them directly into the water at Nierstein. By 5 o'clock in the morning of March 22nd, Lieutenant Commander Lade had all of his boats operational in the water and performing various assigned tasks.
The conditions at Nierstein at the time of the crossing were generally favorable for the smaller vessels. The Rhine there was approximately 800 feet wide,
The current was relatively slow, measured at about 2.5 miles per hour, and the estimated depth was 10 feet. These conditions favored the use of the nimble landing craft vehicle personnel. 3 of these craft immediately began assisting the Army engineers in vital tasks such as building essential bridges and deploying booms and protective nets. Once the most efficient method for deploying the boats as rapid troop transports was successfully sorted out by the Army ground forces, the operational activity accelerated dramatically. In a stunning 48-hour period, the landing craft vehicle personnel carried more than 15,000 troops across the river. The highly professional boat crews managed to ferry the troops across the Rhine and quickly return with German prisoners of war and casualties. This efficient system allowed for an incredibly fast turnaround time of only 6 to 8 minutes per complete round trip. All of this dangerous work was executed under sporadic German artillery fire, occasional small arms fire, and intermittent air attacks. Remarkably, despite the continuous exposure to enemy action, the United States Navy suffered 0 casualties during this particular phase of the operation. The next major assault crossing took place in the 8th Corps sector at Bobbert. The 87th Infantry Division was designated to cross, and 6 landing craft vehicle personnel from Oppenheim were assigned to participate. Lieutenant Commander Lyde strongly advocated for launching the boats during the early morning darkness on March 26th. His intention was to use the darkness to protect the vulnerable craft from German artillery fire. However, he was overruled by the Army command. The crossing began in daylight, but fortunately, the operation proceeded without the loss of any boats or personnel. During this crossing, the landing craft vehicle personnel, each capable of carrying 36 men, made 9 round trips every single hour. The result was the ferrying of 5,000 men and 400 vehicles across the Rhine. On the afternoon of March 26th, 6 landing craft vehicle personnel were once again engaged supporting the 89th Infantry Division's crossing near Oberwesel. The initial transit effort by the division was made using unprotected ducks, which were Army amphibious trucks. This initial attempt proved to be extremely costly, resulting in heavy losses among the infantrymen. Since the division failed to establish a secure bridgehead with the Army equipment, they swiftly turned to the United States Navy for assistance. This time, the naval units, utilizing both the smaller landing craft vehicle personnel and the larger landing craft mechanized, effectively took over the entire crossing operation. Within a mere 48 hours, the naval crews successfully carried the entire 89th Division across the Rhine. Every vehicle and all of the division's equipment were transported without the naval units suffering any further casualties. The Navy had decisively proven its point regarding the reliability and safety of its specialized landing craft, though it came at a high price for the foot soldiers who had tragically formed the first, vulnerable waves. The final river crossing in Patton's sector was launched on very short notice opposite the major city of Mainz. This occurred early on March 28th and involved the XX Corps' 80th Infantry Division. The assault utilized a dozen landing craft vehicle personnel and 6 landing craft mechanized vessels. The 80th Infantry Division attempted the same initial tactic as the 89th had tried earlier, and it was also initially unsuccessful. The very first assault wave, consisting of 20 Army assault craft launched at 1 o'clock in the morning, was virtually wiped out by enemy fire. Consequently, at 3:30 in the morning, the commanding Army officer in charge temporarily suspended the entire crossing operation due to the overwhelming enemy fire. However, United States Naval Reserve Ensign Oscar Miller did not receive the critical suspension order. He proceeded to launch the first landing craft vehicle personnel across the river. This boat was intended to land approximately 500 yards below the pre-planned line of departure. This crucial, unauthorized move proved successful as it met with absolutely no enemy resistance. Following his success, the other naval boats were then launched, and all proceeded without suffering any casualties. In a swift 3-hour period, 3,500 men successfully made the crossing to the far bank. Unfortunately, at 7 o'clock in the morning, German artillery found its mark on the launching site. The enemy fire scored a direct hit on a bulldozer. The strike demolished several trucks that were waiting on the launch pad. Tragically, this incoming fire killed United States Navy Lieutenant Junior Grade Vincent Avalone, who became the Navy's sole fatality during the entire Rhine River crossing operation. Despite this loss in the continued enemy shelling, the essential work went on unabated. The dedicated boat crews and support personnel worked grueling 6-hour shifts continuously for 3 entire days without any break or respite. The relentless pace underscored the high demand for their specialized service, For the sustained and effective performance in supporting the United States Third Army's 4 distinct Rhine River crossings, Lieutenant Commander Lyde's boat unit earned very special praise from General Patton himself. In a formal letter of commendation dated April 23, Patton explicitly cited the impressive transport of thousands of soldiers and vehicles. He noted that the operation was executed in a manner that drew the sincere appreciation and profound admiration of his entire army for the unit's crucial participation. While the successful river crossings executed by the Third Army were characteristic of a hasty operation made on the run, the actions carried out by Lieutenant General William Simpson's United States Ninth Army reflected a completely different planning philosophy. The Ninth Army was operating under the overall command of the British Field Marshal Montgomery, a commander famous for his meticulous and elaborate planning. Montgomery demanded a detailed and elaborate plan for the crossing. This plan meticulously stipulated the exact times for nighttime transits, specifying precise moments for crossing by both Army assault boats and Navy landing craft vehicle personnel. These crossings were scheduled to commence only after a full 2-hour artillery fire preparation. The 9th Army's 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions were designated to cross the river on either side of the small Rhine River town of Rheinberg. The assault operation was robustly supported by Lieutenant Commander Patrick's task unit, which was allocated its standard complement of landing craft vehicle personnel and 24 landing craft mechanized vessels. After the initial assault waves were successfully ferried across using the Army assault boats, the Navy landing craft followed, carrying the heavy equipment. The start of the 9th Army's operation immediately encountered severe logistical problems. There was significant initial trouble safely unloading the massive boats from the tractor-trailers. This dangerous process had to be performed in complete darkness on rough and uneven terrain, all while the units were actively under German artillery fire. The situation worsened when a crane accidentally dropped the very first landing craft vehicle personnel scheduled to be unloaded. This incident augured poorly for the subsequent launching of the remainder of the boats. Despite this damaging setback, by 9:30 in the morning, 5 other landing craft vehicle personnel had been successfully brought to the river. The larger landing craft mechanized vessels presented their own unique challenge. To avoid damage to their propellers, they had to be forcefully pushed into the water bow first, a maneuver that was ultimately accomplished without sustaining propeller damage. The results of the concerted effort on D-Day for the 9th Army were extraordinary. Lieutenant Commander Patrick's boat unit managed to ferry a staggering 3,000 troops across the river. Furthermore, they transported 374 tanks and specialized tank destroyers, 15 heavy bulldozers, 80 57mm anti-tank guns, and 500 jeeps and various other vehicles. The efficiency was maintained on the return trips as well. The boats successfully evacuated 200 casualties and brought back 500 German prisoners of war. In a particularly notable, if less combat-oriented event, one of the landing craft mechanized vessels had the unique and dubious honor of ferrying British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, Field Marshals Montgomery and Alan Brooke, and General Simpson upon the Rhine. This cruise lasted approximately half an hour. The only notable recorded contribution of these high-ranking individuals during the unusual excursion was the shared act of relieving themselves directly into the river. This humorous anecdote highlights the often chaotic and improvisational nature of even the most high-profile military operations. The sustained contribution of the naval units was fundamental to the entire campaign. Seaman First Class Richard Michael Berkler, United States Naval Reserve, serving as the coxswain on a United States Navy landing craft mechanized of Task Unit 122.5.2, represents the countless unheralded sailors and Coast Guardsmen who performed this vital function. These individuals manned the powerful boats that reliably transported thousands of American soldiers, massive amounts of weaponry, and countless tons of equipment across the barrier of the Rhine in March 1945. Their tireless work continued long after the initial assault wave. The operations demanded that the crews maintained an extraordinary pace, enduring continuous 6-hour shifts for multiple days without respite, ensuring the steady flow of personnel and material. The strategic necessity of these boat units is clear. Without the invaluable and specialized contribution of the United States Navy and the United States Coast Guard, the Allied crossing of the Rhine River would simply not have been accomplished with such crucial speed and success.
The fact that the boats were required at all stemmed from a major strategic miscalculation months before at Arnhem.
The necessity was recognized quickly by commanders such as Lieutenant General Bradley and Admiral Stark, leading to rapid planning and effective joint training that utilized both Army engineer assets and specialized Navy boats. The preparatory period was extensive, starting in October 1944. It involved complex logistical maneuvers, including the overland transport of the huge landing craft mechanized vessels on 70-ton tractor trailers. This preparation was severely tested by the German Ardennes offensive in December, forcing the tactical retreat of some units and a change of focus to defensive demolition training. When the moment arrived in March 1945, whether in the hurried response to the captured bridge at Remagen or in the carefully orchestrated assault under Montgomery's direction, the training proved essential. Lieutenant Wenker's Task Unit 122.5.1, attached to the 1st Army, transitioned quickly from assisting in pontoon bridge construction to heavy troop transport after the Ludendorff Bridge collapsed. They successfully moved 14,000 troops and 400 vehicles, demonstrating their vital role in securing the initial critical bridgehead. The work undertaken by Lieutenant Commander Lyde's Task Unit 122.5.2, supporting Patton's audacious 3rd Army crossings, showcased the sheer efficiency of the naval operation. Despite initial difficulties in coordinating with Army commanders, the boat's worth was proven by their exceptional speed. The consistent turnaround time of 6 to 8 minutes per trip, carrying 36 men in the landing craft vehicle personnel, allowed 15,000 troops to cross the river in just 48 hours at Nierstein. The crossings at Oberwesel and Mainz vividly highlighted the dangers of using inadequate Army equipment first. When the 89th and 80th Infantry Divisions suffered high casualties using Army assault craft and ducks, they turned to the naval units, which then successfully carried the remaining divisions across with minimal or zero casualties. The successful, albeit unauthorized, launch by Ensign Oscar Miller at Mainz underscored the importance of initiative and the reliability of the specialized craft in high-risk situations. The highly detailed and intensive training sessions conducted by Lieutenant Commander Lyde's men on the Moselle River paid dividends. They experimented thoroughly, ensuring that the landing craft vehicle personnel could accommodate every necessary piece of equipment, from a 9.5-ton bulldozer to 14 litter-bound casualties. This exhaustive preparation guaranteed operational readiness across diverse missions. The logistical capability of Task Unit 122.3, supporting the 9th Army's planned assault, was instrumental in moving massive amounts of heavy armor, fulfilling Montgomery's strict planning requirements. The unit successfully ferried hundreds of tanks, tank destroyers, and artillery pieces. The ability to transport such heavy armored fighting vehicles was solely dependent on the presence of the powerful landing craft mechanized Mike boats. Ultimately, the true significance of the United States Navy and United States Coast Guard involvement lies in the scale and efficiency of their contribution. Their expertise in handling large landing craft, honed through earlier experiences like the invasion of Normandy, was perfectly adapted to the demanding conditions of the Rhine. The success of the United States Army in moving so many of its forces across this very wide and fast-moving obstacle relied entirely on the skills of these professional boatmen. The transport of thousands of soldiers, vital weapons, and enormous quantities of supplies created the necessary momentum for the final campaign into Germany. The fact remains that while the combat troops justly received perpetual acclaim, the complex, dangerous, and ceaseless work performed by Task Group 122.5, the sailors and Coast Guardsmen who kept the vital river highway open, remains one of the most crucial yet understated logistical and operational successes of the European campaign. Their professionalism ensured that the United States Army could quickly leverage its advantage and continue the relentless pursuit of the retreating German forces, securing a rapid end to the conflict. Their story is one of operational adaptability, logistical mastery, and unyielding service under fire.